happen in these things. Sometimes we get 40 and sometimes we don't get. But anyway, Bob Proctor is one of the artists here. Bob's lived in the county for a little while and owns a house here, but went back and is still working in the Portland area. He's an economist, among other things. And but the artsy side of him started, I don't know, how many years ago?
About 95.
So over 20 years ago. And he actually put together this exhibit, recruited his encaustic painting friends in Portland to put this exhibit together. And it's been very, very well received. We haven't sold anything, I don't think. Maybe we did, but people like it.
Good.
They do like it. And he did a workshop, which was apparently very successful on encaustic. And now we're, including me, are going to sit down and learn about this ancient process.
So, you know, there's a lot of different ways of slicing an onion, right? So I had a lot of different approaches to take to this talk. I thought it would be most useful. There's some at the end. I have some slides from the workshop, but most of the slides are more talking about the conceptual framework for the work that's in this show. Because there's actually quite a bit that underlies all these works and how they're done in terms of the concept that the artist is using. And so one subtitle that I had for this show was nature, like in all of its manifestations. So you can see here, there's some stuff that kind of looks more like things you could identify with your naked eye, and then a lot of stuff that you can't. But all the work in this show actually is one way or another nature-based. And so what we found over time is that in the West, not as opposed to the East Asia, that in the West, that nature has become something that's what we can see with our eyes. It's the stuff we can see, and that that's been separated from the subjective realm. And a lot of the work in this show is more on from the subjective realm. And so in the East, there's this notion of naturalness as well as nature. And in Japan in particular, there's the Shinto religion, which is actually the indigenous religion of Japan, which is all nature-based. And there's these things called kami, or spirits, that live in natural places, stones, plants, mountains, so forth and so on. And that includes us.
So that would be different than traditional animism, which wouldn't include inhabiting.
Yeah, right. And so so you had all this stuff going on in Asia, and you had all this stuff going on in Europe. All this painting. We're familiar with French Impressionism, for example. And what happened is that Japan had been closed for 300 years. The Dutch had maintained some trading relationships, but then in the mid 19th century, Japan opened itself to the West again. And one of the first things that came to Europe, came to France, were Japanese woodblock prints. So these Japanese ukiyo-e masters started appearing in the mid-1800s. And in comparison to, and we'll get into this a little bit more later on, but the work in that, and then you'll notice the work in the show, flat space, which means, it looks like it's right there on the surface, as opposed to being dead, very unmodeled. So, like this area here, or this area up in here, not a lot of modeling. And strong color and strong blocky color, and also everyday scenes. So that was kind of new in the mid-1800s. Both in Japan, they went through that about 200 years before France went through it. And so we had like, and you know these people, you've seen their work, Manet, Degas, Gauguin, and part of what they were doing is they were rebelling against what the Academy accepted as conventions in painting at that point in time. And so one of the things that they were rebelling against was the notion of pretty. They just had to be very pretty. And as what happened in Asia, they started focusing on everyday scenes, everyday people, or what could also be called, quote unquote, the floating world, or the world of the ephemeral, the world of the everyday that's constantly changing. And you know, you've heard of this guy Pissarro, another one of the French Impressionists. Hirosigi is a very well regarded, probably one of the titans of Japanese woodblock prints. And there's a quote from Pissarro that considered Hirosigi a master of Impressionism. Influence, poster design, you've probably all seen posters from Toulouse-Lautrec, for example. Think about flat images, big color, big forms of color, different colors contrasted next to each other. So shape, color, texture used to define space. What do I mean by space? I mean like this area right here. If we were taking a Western point of view, we have like converging lines when you look down the street towards the lake. You see the lines converging. Well, in Asia, that wasn't the case. It was much flatter space. This is a pretty flat space. It can be read as being very deep, but to our untrained eye, it looks very flat. So this is one example, Degas on the left, and that's either Hirosigi or Hokusai woodblock print on the right. So you see that these woodblock prints affected also the subject matter in mid 19th century Europe. Mary Cassatt on the left, and I forget the chap's name who is the Japanese artist who did the image on the right, which predates Mary Cassatt's. Woman envelope. Everyday scene, pretty ordinary. Licking an envelope. That was new in mid-19th century Europe. Taking things from everyday people and starting to paint everyday people and everyday events. And just kind of stop and think about this for a second. Imagination is the foundation of reality. It's our imagination that creates the world that we see. If our imagination is what creates the world that we see, there's no necessarily any objective reality. And so then, what do you use for painting? So that's a question that Europeans had to confront in the mid-1900s. And I'll come back to that. So the four artists in this show, and Andrea, she's now living in Eugene, longtime Zen student. She was a resident of a couple of Zen centers on the East Coast back in the day. Kirk, whose work is here, that painting up there, he's a neurologist, still practicing. Lives in Portland with his wife. Jeff, whose work is over here, woodworker, longtime Tibetan student, and then myself.
So does Kirk also have anything to do with that Eastern religions?
Not so much. He did a lot of study of Chinese nature painting in preparing these pieces for the show. This was a new way of depicting nature for Kirk. And so these are some people that Jeff and I have studied with. Jeff studied with Terry Louie. I didn't study with him. He still teaches. He teaches Pacific Northwest College of Art, a calligraphy class. And Jeff and I both have studied with Kaz Tanahashi. He lives in Berkeley, travels all over the world, a peace activist, and is just an amazing human being. I first crossed paths with him at Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, and I didn't realize how special an occasion that was with just about 10 of us. And he told some interesting stories about Gary Snyder and Daniel Ellsberg. And this was right before the release of the Pentagon Papers. And so this chap goes way back and knows just an amazing amount of interesting people. Wang Gongyi, I first crossed paths with Wang Gongyi at PNCA when I was doing a lot of printmaking there. And she didn't speak any English. I mean, none, when she first came over. And she's brought, there's this guy, Gordon Gilkey. Now, there's the Gilkey Print Center in the basement of the Portland Art Museum. And Gordon collected prints. He was in the service in World War II in Europe and started collecting prints. And he amassed this world-class collection of prints that he bequeathed to the museum on the condition that the museum establish a print center. Now there's the Gilkey Print Center in the basement of the Portland Art Museum. So Gongyi is an internationally known artist, and so I had an accident in 2003. This is be an interesting insight into Gongyi, and fractured my neck in 4 places, severed my spine, and my partner at the time had been in China for 3 years, and I saw one of Gongyi's advertisements for her calligraphy class, and I thought, well, that'd be really helpful for my hand to get my hand exercise. And anyway, it turned out that I didn't connect the two until she opened the door of her studio, and she said, "I know you." I was like, "I know you." And so she said, she said to me, she says, you know, dude, and I say it this way, not as satire, but as to honor her. And she said, you know, do calligraphy. You're not strong enough to do calligraphy. You do bamboo leaves. And so every week, every Monday night, for 3 hours, for 3 months, I did bamboo leaves, one after another, which is it's very illustrative. The Asian attitude is that, you start very small and you start something very basic, and then, so I'm doing these bamboo leaves, I get sick and tired of doing bamboo leaves. I did 3 months worth of bamboo leaves, and so one Monday night I just said, "To heck with this, I'm tired, I'm going to start doing some calligraphy." So I picked up a calligraphy book out of her stuff and started doing some calligraphy. And she said, "Okay, you're strong enough now, you do some calligraphy." And so I thought, okay, I get it. It was, I I had to be strong enough to take the initiative to begin doing calligraphy, for her to believe that I was strong enough to do calligraphy. And she's still in Portland, still teaching. I'm not sure how to, oh, there we go. So these are just a couple of images that I threw in here of Chinese landscape painting. And the reason I put them in here is, I mean, look how undefined this space is. I mean, all of it, I mean, there's just, just touches of the brush, right? I mean, and so we look at that and we fill it in with our minds of what this is, right? But it could be, this stuff up there could be anything, really. Not very ill-defined. But have you gone through the gorge on a rainy day, or a day when the fog is hanging in against the cliffs in the gorge? Or as storms are passing through the mountains here, and things peak out and go back and come back again. And this reminds me of that. It's also the case that with, from an Asian point of view, calligraphy is a higher art than painting. And that the foundation for painting is in calligraphy. So calligraphy is the foundation upon which Asian pictorial art rests, especially Chinese. And some real, okay, so we say what? We say mountain, we say cliff. Say, oh, it looks like there's something up there, like maybe a building or something. But what about distance? How's distance handled here? Can you really say anything about distance? Well, it turns out that things that are less, stuff that has more texture, more going on, is read as being closer. And things that, and we know this when we look, when we look outside, right? And the Seven Devils have less detail in them if we're standing in Joseph than Joseph Peak is, or Ruby Peak, right? And as we approach the trees that are closest to us, more detail comes out. And so in the work in this show, we're using those experiences to define space in a different way, other than using images that that we connect, that we understand, and we can say, okay, this is more forward than that.
But Bob, we also have the ability to focus. So we can focus on the distance, at which point the close thing becomes blurry. Or we can focus on, on the near, at which point the far things become blurry, right?
Sure, I mean, if we focused on these two paintings here, the stuff over there in the sales area appear less prominent, right? So we can do that. But if we focus, now you focus, turn around, you focus at the images in the distance, there's no way that they have the same detail as what's next to you, right? So what you say is true, is we can change our focal point.
Right.
It's still the case that things that are further away. If we took one of these paintings and put it over there, we wouldn't see as much detail, even if that's where we were focusing on. We just can't pick it up with our eyes. Other animals can, of course, right? You know, hawks and eagles. We just don't have those kind of eyes. I thought this was kind of a neat one. You have what's probably a couple of cranes down here in the lower left. And using we kind of figured that this is probably closer, right? Probably closer to the person doing the image than the mountains in the far background. But you notice here is how much depth is there in this? How far back does it go? You know, if we're walking up Hurricane Creek Trail, you know, we can pretty much judge, right? We can say, okay, boy, I know that mountain's a lot bigger than it looks, but I know it's pretty far off. But what do we do with something like this?
It almost looks like there are layers of 2 dimensions rather than a gradual perspective.
Yeah.
So they've got the front image is flat, and then behind that you have that next, looks to me like there are 3 or 4 flat pieces, one behind each other.
Right, exactly. That you know, we're pretty certain that this is pretty forward, right? That this is foreground. Right. So in landscape painting, there's foreground, middle ground, background. So how does historically the Asian art handle that? Well, this looks pretty much the same way, right? Foreground, it's right real close by, and then it all disappears, and it becomes very clear. So what Asians are doing, and a lot of this work here, like this piece of Kirk's. This piece of Kirk's here. To me, that reads like a pretty flat space. Not real sure whether, you know, you think about being at the coast on a cloudy day, right? Is this a cloudy day at the coast where everything's obscure? Or is this a day at the coast where it's been really sunny? We're not sure.
Isn't this where the imagination comes in? You know, I mean, even looking at that work, when you look in the background, they're really just smears of gray. And it's our imagination that decides they're either clouds or mountaintops or whatever you want them to be.
Yeah, we fill a lot of that in, don't we? We fill.
Well, I do.
We all do. We all do.
Yeah.
And so artists can use that. We don't need to fill everything in.
Right, and do we have to know what they are?
Right.
Not necessarily.
And so if we don't, you know, some people get frustrated by that. Like, I want to be able to tell where I'm at in the scene. I want to be able to tell if that's a tree, or is that a mountain, or is this a sunny day or a cloudy day at the coast? I can't tell. And some people, you know, then reach a conclusion that this is bad art.
Yeah.
And it might be bad art. It might be. What I'm suggesting is that there's also other ways of expanding our repertoire of how we look and how we perceive. As it turns out, that the Chinese and the Asians have a tool that they use to help define space. And the stuff that's at the bottom of the picture plane is the stuff that's closer. And as you go as you go up the picture plane, you go further back in space. So, you know, this space here, we can see some foreground, we can see some middle ground, you know, like maybe through here. And up here, though, we kind of get lost. It's like we don't really know whether that's really far back and it's a clear day, or whether this is all just atmospheric fog. And the Asians historically are masters of that stuff. Okay, so threads in this show. Surrealism and Zen, wabi-sabi, and Western and Eastern pictorial space. We talked a little bit about Western and Eastern pictorial space. Let me talk about surrealism and Zen. This is very, you know, especially with Jeff and I's work in the show, we go back to our Zen training a whole lot. So in surrealism, you know, you can think about like Dali does all those crazy things, or Magritte. They're talking about stuff, they're pointing to stuff that's not, they're using literal images to point to things that are not the literal image. So the word or the picture is not the thing itself. And our description is always different than the thing that's being described or painted. What does that mean? Well, you've seen this before. This painting by Magritte called The Treachery of Images. This is not a pipe. And so is he just playing with us? Is he just jerking our chain? He's actually being very literal. He's actually being very, very literal, believe it or not. He's saying, this isn't a pipe. So, but what is it? It's a painting. And so this is the treachery of images, right? Let me see if I can. So, what is this? You've all seen this thing from Duchamp. Armut. What is it?
Urinal.
It's a urinal. Is it? Is this a urinal?
That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. It looks like a photo.
Like a what?
It looks like a photo of a urinal.
A photo of the urinal, right.
Right? But what you said, Rich, really is at the heart of this, that we conflate. We conflate one with the other. And so, you know, you might, you know, this is in a museum, so but why is it taking up space in the august institutions? Why is this urinal on a podium in a gallery? What's he saying? You know, he's commenting on art. He's commenting on preciousness. He's making a lot of statements about what can be considered art. He's really actually trying to expand our sideboards on how we view life. You know, a common day thing, you know, so-and-so says something and you get upset about it, right? And what do we say? We say, that person, a pain in the neck, right? What I know is that I'm saying it, right? That's coming from me. Maybe that person is a pain in the neck. But what's true is that I am classifying this object in a particular way. That's as much the treachery of images as as this is. You know, we're classifying and defining things in a particular way. And they're not always that way, right? But they are how we see them, and how we see them is important to understand. So that's part of what Jeff and I are working with in how we go about doing what we do. Another broad theme in our work is what comes out of Japan. It's known as wabi-sabi. This really underlies all of Japanese aesthetics. And historically, culturally, it used to be the case that in Japan, tea service used Chinese implements and so forth, very shiny porcelain and so forth and so on. And also in Japan, historically official documents and everything were in Chinese. Well, that shifted where about the same time, around 1300s, this guy Dogen Zenji brought Zen from China to Japan, and he started writing in Japanese. That was a huge thing. Up until that point, it was Chinese. Also, in tea service being one of the 5 arts, calligraphy, painting, ikebana, poetry, and tea. Then the fancy stuff from China got destroyed, and they started using stuff that was less ornamented, things that were bare. You can think of your wooden spoon in your house. That started to be used in Japanese tea service, which was a revolution, or the raw beauty of a gray day. Rough textures and subtle hues as opposed to bright colors and things that are very smooth and shiny. So in reality, this would be wabi-sabi, and you should probably recognize where that image is taken. Does it look familiar?
That's Sir Optimus.
Yeah, Sir Optimus. Right. So that's wabi-sabi. That's not. And it's got nothing to say about Victoria's Secret or the products that it sells. I'm talking about the design. Shiny, bright color, the antithesis of wabi-sabi. This is wabi-sabi. This might not look so familiar, but it's from something local here. It's from the Jennings, yeah, the Jennings. So this is wabi-sabi, individual, crafted. That's not mass-produced, so forth and so on. This is wabi-sabi. This is a piece of broken pottery that has been repaired and gains value.
Well, it's been repaired with gold. But
Well, yeah. Even though it's gold, this is still considered wabi-sabi compared to that. Okay, so that gives me a little bit better feel for like what might be wabi-sabi and what might not be. So there's a lot of wabi-sabi in Wallowa County. Right? There's a lot of but we have to be careful that lack of maintenance doesn't make it wabi-sabi. Okay? So, you know, the barn falling down doesn't make it wabi-sabi. Now you take that barn wood and you use it in another application, that would be.
It's good to know what it means, wabi-sabi, Jeff, but I just like the name. I would just like to keep saying wabi-sabi.
It's a great name,
It's
right?
been a great name.
It's a great name. It's just sort of like, it's such a fun word. It's a fun phrase. There's this guy Basho. He's a real, 12th century, 13th century famous Japanese poet. And one of his famous sayings is, even in Kyoto, I'm nostalgic for Kyoto. What he's saying is that he wanted to be able to see the true Kyoto. And, that is, look below the surface of things. That the essence, its nature, the essence of nature, lies below the surface of nature. So if you wanted to say, what's the essence of Joseph? You'd want to look underneath, the bronze statues down Main Street. Look at the essence. What is the essence of the community? That's a question that he's raising even in Kyoto. I want to find the true Kyoto. So in the work that Jeff and I did, and I think to some extent, and also Andrea, to some extent, Kirk, we're looking for. We don't want to do nature paintings. We want to paint nature. We want to express nature. Okay, we've touched on this a little bit already. This is very familiar to us. This is what we're used to. This is single point perspective, linear perspective. Just like when you're looking down the street, the buildings, there's, 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon in February, you look down Main Street, there's no cars. And you can see the building sides actually do converge a little bit as you go south. You can have 2, 3, 4 point. There are different kinds of linear perspective, but this is historically what was Western art was based on linear perspective, and so it told us what to look at. It told us what was important because it pointed to it. In contrast to that, where do you focus? And this is a lot like the paintings that I had a few slides ago, Chinese painting. Well, we know that this is a foreground, and as we go up in the picture space, we go foreground to background. What kind of so do you know what to focus on there? Does it direct you or not? Doesn't direct you, right? Yeah. Well, what about a culture that uses this way of depicting space versus one that tells you what's important?
Did they choose to always, Asian cultures, did they choose to always keep this style? Because I know, like in Europe, they learned over a long time how to draw depth and paint depth,
Right.
and it was something that took them time,
Right, yeah, I mean, it took to the Renaissance
yeah.
to begin figuring out linear perspective.
Make it.
Right, And so in the Renaissance, Europe figured that out, right? And you can look at paintings from the 14th, 15th, 16th century where the perspective looks weird, and just because it just didn't quite get it. Right.
So did the Asian cultures continue to choose? I thought they were.
It became more mixed.
Okay.
Where you can look at you know, stuff from the 18th, 19th, 20th century, even till today, where it becomes more mixed between. This is still very strong.
So
Are they still trying to make a point on not telling you what to look at? Is it just a way of being?
It would be great if this would be a good video to get a hold of. A Day on the Grand Canal with the Emperor of China, narrated by David Hockney. And it's this long scroll, like, I don't know, like 30 feet long, right? And it's rolled up on both ends. And as you unroll it, the Emperor of China is flowing down the Grand Canal. And he talks about these issues in greater depth than I can here today, of what does this say about it? What does it say about the community that perceives space this way versus how we've learned to perceive it?
So, go back to the previous one, Bob. It occurs to me, look at the calligraphy on top. It occurs to me, how many calligraphic characters are there in Chinese? I mean, it's thousands, right?
Yeah, thousands.
And so we have, over the Western world, over the last, you know, like this, beginning with the Greeks, has really used, has used symbols to have meaning that's totally divorced from the shape of that symbol.
Yeah.
It's just a code that we learn.
Yeah.
Whereas the difference there between, it's almost like those calligraphic images are like the images on the painting, that they're each a distinct one, where we don't have that. It's a total different way of looking at the world, in essence.
So
Where we would have, maybe what it says on that thing is this is the Han River going through the whatever mountains.
and was owned by Zhang Qingmu before Han Baohu acquired it.
Yeah. So all that, you know, we'd have, it could never be, you could never put our words on the painting like that as integral to the painting because they're totally divorced from it.
Except for the one where, you know, in French, this is not a play.
Yeah, but that's because the code is really stark there.
Yeah.
And it actually, you could even make the argument that it plays into it because, you know. This
Yes, it does, right.
Because the words here are not the pipe either.
Right, that's true, that's true. Yeah, you know, the Chinese and Japanese language, what I refer to as kanji, K-A-N-J-I. Those symbols, it's a pictorial language, right? Where you have, I mean, that these symbols in combination make a phrase,
Right.
and we don't have that.
No.
An A is an A, a B is a B, a Z is a Z. We put those letters together to make a word. The word describes something, but we don't have a language like there, where the image itself is a thing. And yeah, so that's a really a key difference between Western and Eastern language. It goes right to the heart of
and even actually the New World cultures, say the Mayan culture or the Aztec culture, which would have been closer to the Asian than to the European.
And what's the case there?
Well, they had again, pictographs, and they didn't have an alphabet.
Not a written language as we understand it in the
No,
West.
but they had symbols.
Huh.
But on the other hand, you know, the Mayans they developed mathematics.
Yeah.
So they
And
had zero.
astronomy. I mean, just amazing.
Pardon?
And astronomy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they had symbolism in a different, and their images wouldn't have been, their images would have been geometric, more geometric, and their mathematics was, I'm sure, important for making their cities, their pyramids, their built, so their images were of either built things or stylized animals. So they brought that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and so, you know, maybe it's the case with those folks too, that, you know, getting back to, maybe it's question, observation of, well, you know, do we find anything in Asian art that uses these kind of techniques as opposed to that way of it? Yes, we do. It exists, and you can find them even in the 16th, 17th century woodblock prints that came out of Japan. You can see some rudimentary attempts at describing space in that way. I selected this image because I didn't want it to be ambiguous. I wanted a very clear example. So if you look at the work in the show, it's more like this than that. So this, like I said, this is a really good video. This is a great video. Superb. David Hockney does a great job. And I actually think that some of how they were just playing with space and describing space influenced people like Cezanne and then led to Cubists. So I think you can draw a connection between, and he does this in, talks about this in this video. Okay, so we're getting towards the end here. Titles. How does this work titled? One approach of the Surrealist book is, you know, they were all about chance. One of the things they were doing about chance observations and letting chance play a bigger role rather than intentional design. So they open a book, put a finger down, and that's the title. I can't do that. I need more control. With Jeff, I know, Jeff usually in his oil paintings, there's some connection to, like he does a lot of oil painting down around French Glen and Malheur, and it'll be like the ranch next door, and all it is this, right? It'll be but that kind of anchors it in space, right? It doesn't give you a lat and longe. You couldn't find it on a GPS, but at least it gives you an anchor. So titles are really important that way, right? I mean, you know, we all look at titles, don't we? We look at the image and we look at the title. We look at the image, we look at the title. It works, it doesn't work, you know. I know also from Jeff, he also pulls out of Buddhist principles in his titles, as do I. Just a couple of pieces of mine to illustrate this. On the other wall there's Fire on Sourdough Mountain. And I title, my stuff gets titles after it's done. Because I don't know what it's going to be, because I don't start out with any kind of preconceived notion of what I'm going to do. This is actual place, Sourdough Mountain's an actual place. It's in North Cascades National Park. It's the site of the first Forest Service fire lookout tower in the United States. It also happens to be a place where beat poets Gary Snyder and Phil Whalen spent time as fire lookouts. So one of the things that, both in Jeff's work and my work, the titles are usually layered. There's usually, you know, layers of referencing. This one over here, I titled it Tic-Tac-O. This is a symbol, you've probably all seen it, called an enso. But it's got a lot of significance in Asian culture. And what it is it's a representation of that everything's connected. You know, we're connected to the mountain, to the water, to the bugs, to the wolves, to the elk. You can't pull the things apart. Also the case in calligraphy, Chinese calligraphy, a single stroke painting is the most difficult painting to do. And we don't think of it that way, do we? You know, at least I was trained, the way I learned was that, you know, something like this or this was really complex. And something like that was really simple. And they look at it differently. You know, and what they're looking at, though, is they're looking at energy. They're looking at how present the person is when they're putting that mark on the canvas. Are they really there? And as you practice it, you can tell the difference between a mark that's made by someone who's really there when they made that mark and someone who wasn't. This size, these 9, is 24 inches by 24 inches. It's about 1/4 of a tatami mat. And in Japan, rooms historically have been described as the number of tatamis. So we might say it's 24 square feet. They might say it's that the tatami mat is 3 feet by 6 feet, so it's 18 square feet. They would say, oh, it's 3 1/4 tatamis. So we've been, we play with so we're getting on here and just some images from the Encaustic workshop, and we were just gathering these photos are from Shiro, and
so. Can you just say a word about
Sure.
why this medium is adapted to? So I'm assuming that this encaustic medium was developed in the East.
It developed in probably in the area of southern Europe around Greece. And
It was actually involved in Europe.
Yeah, so it's sort of but those are probably borderlands. I mean, I've been as far east as Hungary.
So what you're saying is this medium was developed in Europe, but then what's the relation to the Far East?
So the relationship in the show to the Far East.
Well, I know in the show, but is there a traditional relationship as well?
I don't know. But actually, that's a good question. I do not know the answer to it.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's not something Japanese painters would use.
I don't know, actually. I've never wondered about that. It's a really good question.
So,
Yeah.
So the traditional, encaustic was developed in about what time in Southern Europe?
Probably the 15th 15, 14, 13. I mean, it's really, really old.
And what was the impetus for it?
You know, that's a good question. And speculation is that it might have come out of, in Greece, they were using wax to seal their fishing boats. And they're painting it with really bright color. And so there's some speculation. And then like a lot of the Greek statues were covered in caustic. Of course, it's gone now. But, so.
Bright colors.
Sorry?
With bright colors.
I don't know about the bright color part. I know with the fishing boats, it was bright colors. And I also know it was used with statuary.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. I was told that, my recollection is that the Greek sculpture had vivid colors on it.
Oh, is that right? Huh, interesting. And they all.
Yeah,
that's
it's gone
just
now.
Gone now.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, so that, you know, it's in that, as far as I know, it's in that neck of the woods. Where,
So what did the encaustic medium allow an artist to do that he or she couldn't do with with canvas and oil at the time?
And just along those lines, Rich,
Pardon?
along those lines, Rich, if I may, what motivates artists to use encaustic, do you think?
that's an easier question to
I
answer.
thought so. And I
Well, I'm
apologize
thinking
for
about
calling.
that one. When I'm thinking about an answer to that one,
I'll do the easy
I'll
one.
do that one.
Bob, I apologize for calling.
It's okay. You know, it's like, you know, I used to teach college, and so it teaches you that, I got a lot of practice in thinking on my feet. Sometimes I do better sitting down. But you know, it's part of it's personal preference, right? Part of it is encaustic is, you know, is very flexible. It's a very flexible medium. As long as you have it on something very hard. You know, you can't put wax. You can't do encaustic just on a canvas. Like, go to a store, you buy, you know, a stretched canvas. Not going to work with encaustic because it's got too much give in it, right? So even there's some pieces in the show of Jeff's that are on canvas, but that canvas is on wood. Okay, so it's on something very sturdy. That being said, the thing that I really like about encaustic is I don't have to worry about what material I use with it. I can throw anything together, so long as it's porous. You know, so like shiny wrapping paper, not so good. But I don't, like with oils, if I want to do mixed media, I have to worry about the paper product. It's not going to be archival. The oil will eat the paper. That's not a problem with encaustic. You can throw all sorts of stuff in encaustic. And
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
So it's not necessarily the final result, it's just the process that appeals to you?
Well, you
Or
know,
both?
like, you know, Cecile will walk into the garage where I was doing the work for this show, because it's all warm honey. You know, it smells like warm honey. It just smells great. And I love the surface. And the thing in caustic painters, the holy grail is to have a smooth surface. And so I really enjoy the surface. I enjoy the media. I don't have to worry about mixing stuff. You know, all kinds of different kinds of paper. And one of the things we did in the workshop was, just a little bit, was how to go about using water media with wax, hot wax. It can be done. And
So you put I know this isn't a workshop.
No, it's okay.
You put the wax on the surface and then you put the pigment
into the wax, or you mix the pigment and the wax and then put it on?
So let me get to, let's use some of these slides because it'll help. And Megan, jump in at any time.
Well, I was just gonna say, if, I bet 95% of people would enjoy this art if you tried. I went in not really knowing what was gonna go on, and he gave me a pointer, just go in there, don't have an idea in mind, just go with it, and that's what you needed to do. And I think, if you had a stressful life or not very much at all, just going in there and putting on the layers calmly and letting the wax do what it wanted to do, and just kind of giving up control, and then just watching the colors break and move and blend. It was so calming, and I just walked out of there just feeling so good about life. It was very wonderful. I would love to do it more.
It's and some of the other things that I like about encaustic is like with oils. I don't like acrylics so much. I don't like the plastic nature of it. So the painting, when I do painting, I do usually oils. Yeah, but then it takes a long time for them to dry. And with the wax, I mean, it's dry.
So again, the basic stuff, where does the pigment come in?
So the pigment, this here isn't pigment yet. This is, this is my little handy dandy mixing tool from Goodwill, where I've melted pound block of pharmaceutical grade wax and some Damar varnish crystals, and about 4:1 ratio. Melt it. So this is the medium.
Okay.
Okay. This happens to be turned off, so it's solidified and it has a color to it. But that's where the melting of the. Then, if you see, this is called a hot pallet. It's a piece of steel. And there's a 2-burner hot plate under there at about 200 degrees. Keeps that pallet nice and hot. This here, the loaf pan is filled with hot wax. The same, that's what from that right there. Take some of that hot wax. Let's see. I know that Cheryl had a photo, I didn't put it in here, of powder. There's a couple of different kinds of ways to get color. There's what's called powdered pigment, these little plastic containers with powdered pigment in it. And then there are these different kinds of bars or jars of color. And so we played with different kinds. And so what you do is take a little bit of wax out of that reservoir, put it on your hot palette, take a little bit of whatever color you want to work with, tap just a little bit. You don't need very much, do you? Just a tiny bit, and onto that hot wax. Mix it on your hot palette.
So mix it on.
You're good to go. You mix it on the palette. It's just that palette is just like your oil palette or your acrylic palette. It just has to stay warm because you're painting.
So then you have to transfer it to your painting surface pretty quickly.
So you had that right there.
The palette stayed really hot, so it kept the wax melted. So you didn't have to transfer it fast because that whole metal piece is hot.
Oh.
And so it stays liquid on that metal piece.
So this whole thing is hot.
Oh, I got you now.
Okay.
I got you now.
This whole thing is hot. This is a homemade system. You can spend, you can go online to, like Blick, they'll sell you this kind of setup for $300.
Yeah.
Okay?
Or you can go to Goodwill.
You can go to Goodwill and you pick up a hot plate, and you get somebody with a tie and die that
drill holes in a steel plate and tap them, go in hardware store, buy 4 bolts, and you've got your hot pallet for, I don't know, $50, roughly, you know?
Huh.
And you'll see here, you see, it's a little hard to see it, but there's a person with a torch there.
Yeah.
So we put a thing of wax on the board, and then you have to fuse it. Fuse it means, you know, you have to. It's not yet really connected to what's underneath of it. And so you hit it with a torch. You hit it with a torch, or you see the bottom there's a heat gun. Again, you can go online to $75 for a heat gun from Licks, $25 from the Ace Hardware.
Fire's more fun.
What's that?
Or a $10 hair dryer.
Well,
They're hot.
I don't know if they're hot enough.
The fire's fun, Rich. You'll want to go with the fire.
Go with the fire?
Go with the fire.
Okay.
And so a lot of the craft is learning how to control the torch. I don't know, you want to say anything about that, Megan?
Yeah, that was one of the fun parts because I could go over it from a distance and really smooth it out and have a little bit more control. Or every once in a while I got a little closer and the color would move away from the flame and yeah, it was
The torch, learning the torch and controlling the flame on the torch and the closeness of the flame to the surface is a lot of how you get all these different kinds of effects with the same medium. And, you know, like a lot of like that one down the bottom in the lower left there, you know, things happen and you kind of go either, wow, Shazam, I hope I can leave that, or you go, that sucks. And, you know, you might have to.
We're going somewhere.
So one of the things that I had them do is after you have these boards and you know, we first did with these little 6x6 or 8x8 birch panels, and you coat it with a layer of wax, just clear wax. Heat that, make it fuse to the board. Okay, you've done that a few times. Okay, now let's scrape it all off. And, you know, painters don't like to scrape. They don't like to destroy what they've already done. But you've got to be willing to destroy it. And so this person on the right here is fusing clear wax on this birch panel in preparation of painting. This is the start of the process. The person on the left has gone through that step and is now scraping off what they just did. And so another thing about this process is that it's both additive and subtractive. You know, like you add, you put more wax on, put more color on, subtract, scrape. You can do that with oils, right? Can't do that so well with watercolor, right? Watercolor, you do it, it's there. It's a very unforgiving medium. So maybe that's another part of the answer to this, is it's a very forgiving medium. You know, you can do a lot. And so back to your question, Rich, was why would you use encaustic as opposed to something else? You know, I wonder if way back when they hadn't yet invented oil painting. you know,
If
they
this predated oil.
yeah, that they maybe didn't have the medium, that the color. So that, you know, the oil paint, you get it in a tube. Most of what's in that tube is stuff that is not related to the color. It's stuff that is, carries the color. The color is actually dry pigment, same dry pigment that we use,
Yeah.
that's used here.
Yeah. So
It's
what-
the coloring in oil paint.
So what did early oil painter, what was the oil that was used?
You got me there. Probably really nasty stuff.
So what's used now is
Would have been goat oil from animals, right? So from goats.
probably something like that.
Chicken fat or something like that. Because the oil-based things now are petroleum-based, right?
Yeah.
So they had to discover petroleum before they.
Yeah, it would have had to have been some kind of a animal oil or a
But, you know,
vegetable.
they whale, you know how they burn
Yeah.
whale fat for the cannons.
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
goats and-
it had to be.
Well, they had vegetable oils, you had olive oils and,
Well, that's true.
you know,
Yeah.
so you had vegetable oils and you had animal oils.
But you
Both
know,
of which actually are closer to, in a certain way, closer to wax.
But they wouldn't keep.
yeah, that's the thing is that in there,
This would keep forever, but.
yeah, as long, you know, and so, yeah, you know, if you probably don't want like August, 2 o'clock sun shining
Correct.
through your window on this stuff, but you also don't want it freezing. Because, you know, wax, it cracks when it gets cold, right? What happens if you put a candle in the freezer?
Of
It's
course,
pretty
oil,
brittle.
over centuries, oil cracks.
Yeah.
So how widely is this practiced now?
It's, you know, it's not quite like drinking scotch, but it's not far away. It's not, it's not way out here, but it's more like, you know, if here's where most people are painting, you know, Encaustic might be out here, or up on
And the
the
people who do
perimeters.
Encaustic usually do, are there people who just do Encaustic or most, or is it?
I'm sure there are.
Okay.
I'm sure there are people who are just, you know, I mean, Kirk, for example, he doesn't do much. He does a little bit with oils, plein air, but not much. He's I mean, his studio, I mean, it's like,
Wax studio.
yeah, it's like 40 loaf pans of different colors with, you know, 3-inch house painting brushes in them. And so that's his gig, really.
Huh.
Much more than Jeff and I.
Bob, would you want to finish and then we can ask questions, or would you?
Yeah, there's just a couple more here. So this is painting on a birch panel. You can see this person has a heat gun there. Was using a heat gun. Megan here, the torch lady, is
Pretending it's her kid's backside.
that I don't know. I won't comment on that. But she worked on that piece pretty much all afternoon, didn't you?
That was the first one.
Was that the first one?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing that is one other thing. So one of the things about painting and whatever media you pick, people try to subvert the media, try to do something that doesn't come natural to the media. So, you know, encaustic is really loose. I say it's a loose media. You know, so controlling it is a real challenge. But there's ways that you can make lines, straight lines, using wax. And you cut into it, is what this artist is doing. They're cutting into the wax that's already on their panel. Then they'll backfill that with a different color and scrape away to leave just a straight line.
So that's how some of the lines on these things? are?
Yeah. Yeah, and I can show you a good example of one of my pieces. I like this quote. It's one of those things where, you know, twist how you see something, you know? There are painters who transform the sun into a yellow spot. They take just a yellow thing and plop, okay, that's the sun, right? And he's saying that, but there's more that you can do. What about if you take that yellow spot that just happens to be on your palette or on your thing, and you say, that's the sun. You call it the sun. You can do that. And one of the attitudes that we take, I can tell you that Jeff and I and Andrew, I don't know how much Kirk is on this, but that we believe this quite literally, that everything in the universe is represented in everything else. There's no separation. You know, or how Carl Sagan put it, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you first have to create the universe. That's the end.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. I'd like to go on a little bit, but that's, I hope nobody had to get out of here right at 1 o'clock, but that was worth it.